Okay. We got a nice crowd here. That is Ron Taylor.
I didn't mean to put myself
Oh,
on the
look,
screen like that.
look at all those folks.
That's not Ron Taylor.
Nah, we're
No,
going
it's
to do
not.
a video later. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Welcome to the Journalism's Roundtable, everybody. Um, my name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms. That's journal-isms.com on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. She said, keep these going, and we have. We met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, meeting in person, as well as having people attend via Zoom. This is our fourth such meeting. And, oh, wait, unmute. Wait a minute. Okay. This is our fourth such meeting. Wait a minute, we don't need that.
Mute your computer because you've got the microphone.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. We learn as we go, don't we? This is only our fourth hybrid. All right. We think of these as an online dinner party, and some of us already have our sandwiches ready, with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the network takes place in the chat room for those on Zoom, so please feel free to make use of it. A special welcome to those on Facebook. Please leave messages in the comments section if you want to reach us. Now, today our topic is rather timely. Dictator on day one. He's one of the candidates is closer to that achieving that goal. How journalists can counter the growing threat of authoritarianism. That means the rights of all of us and the menacing thirst of some to come after journalists. So I want to start this off by introducing Jennifer Dresden, who's right there, who is a policy advocate for for Project Democracy, and she is the primary author of The Authoritarian Playbook: How Reporters Can Contextualize and Cover Authoritarian Threats as Distinct from Politics as Usual. So I want to ask each of these panelists gets 3 minutes, 3 minutes to summarize what they have to say so that we can keep things moving. So I want to ask Jennifer for your 3 minutes. What did you find, and what is the takeaway that you want to leave with the journalists in the room and on Zoom? You certainly do. Go ahead. You got that? Okay.
Thank you. Is this hopefully working? So first, I want to say thank you for the invitation and being here. I come to this conversation with a fair bit of humility. Unlike many of the esteemed folks in the room, I am not a journalist. I'm a political scientist. So I come recognizing that and hoping to share what we learned in the process of putting this report together and share some suggestions for some questions we should be asking ourselves as we try to make sense of everything that is going on. The first major takeaway, I think, when we consider the topic of authoritarianism and how we recognize it and how we cover it, is that authoritarianism happens these days by slow creep, not a bomb drop. That makes it extremely difficult to cover in many instances because it's an erosion of democracy, not sort of an all-at-once event that happens. One thing that I will say is that I think that this is an issue that is on the radar much more than it was a couple of years ago. And I think that that's thanks to a lot of the important and hard work that's been done by some of the folks in this room and also around the country. So I think that the authoritarian threat is on the radar for a lot of Americans, but I think that there is still a little bit of work to be done in terms of making it concrete and making it clear. I think there's an amorphous sense that there is a problem, but that when it comes to recognizing what that problem is and making it tangible, there are a few things that can be done, because we know from looking at examples all over the world that there are 7 different tactics that would-be authoritarians use to come to power. And these range from things like quashing dissent and politicizing independent institutions, all the way to stoking political violence. But they don't all happen at once, but they do reinforce and sort of build on one another in ways that make giving context really, really important. And so the first takeaway that I would offer is one that this erosion process needs to be covered in context in order to make sense, in order to make the authoritarian threat clear. But that this needs to be covered judiciously, right? It is very easy for these things to become a political football in ways that are very detrimental to understanding the problem, to recognizing it. And so because of that, I would offer 3 questions to ask ourselves as we're trying to make sense of these things and to try to make sense of them for readers and audiences as well. The first is what we're seeing actually new? Not all precedent is good precedent. Our democracy is flawed. It has many problems. But it is important to ask, as we think about the authoritarian threat, whether the behavior we're observing, the event we're trying to cover, is actually new and how it relates to that precedent. The second question I think it's important to ask ourselves is to what extent it's happening, right? Again, with the spirit of being judicious and making sure that we're covering real threats. Is this a loose cannon or a one-off thing? Or is it happening to a really deep extent? Or is it happening repeatedly over and over? And then the third question I think to ask ourselves is, how is the rest of the democratic landscape responding, the rest of the system? Our democracy is imperfect, but democracies are meant to self-correct. And one of the things that we heard very, very clearly from the experts that we talked to in putting together this report was that how others react matter. So if there is bad behavior happening, are political allies stepping in to sort of constrain that behavior? Are they putting a stop to it? Or are checks and balances working? If not, if instead what we see is behavior being enabled or being reinforced, that's when we see a really serious threat as part of this authoritarian playbook. So overall, I think that the point that I would leave us with and hope to keep in mind is that because these things become politicized so easily, having a reference point of clear, impartial standards to refer to in terms of what behavior actually does erode democracy, what does authoritarianism look like, and then having strict questions that we ask ourselves consistently is very important to helping that coverage continue to grow and provide and shed light on the threats that we're facing.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we have 2 people here who are actually doing this every day. Griffith White is one from the Washington Post, and on the Zoom, we have Gary Field from the Associated Press. So I'd like to ask each of them to talk about how they're putting...
Richard, we aren't hearing you that well.
Oh, how about turning this on again? I'm good? Okay. All right. So,
That's better.
can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yep.
Good. All right. Anyway, I was saying we have 2 people who are actually putting this into practice every day, and I wanted to hear from them. Griff Witt and Gary Fields. Griff is with the Washington Post, whose building we're also in, and Gary is with the Associated Press. So let me ask, since Griff is in the room and Gary's on Zoom, tell us, how is this playing out day to day in the coverage that you're involved with?
I'll start. Richard, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me here. I'm the democracy editor at the Washington Post. We stood up a democracy team 2 years ago in 2022. And I think, we were among the first news organizations to do that. I think had we done that 10 years ago, everyone would have been looking around saying, what the heck is a democracy editor and why would you need a democracy team at the Washington Post? And my answer to that is the Washington Post should have had a democracy team throughout its entire existence. The Post was founded in 1877 which many of you may know was also the year that Reconstruction ended following an inconclusive presidential election. And what followed was 100 years of Jim Crow segregation throughout the South. That would have been a great time for the Washington Post to have a democracy team. Throughout the civil rights era, that would have been a great time for the Post to have a democracy team. Throughout the entire history of the United States, the question of who gets a say, who gets a seat at the table, whose vote matters, has been in dispute. And it has been in dispute in different ways and through different means, but it remains in dispute today. And the question of who gets a say, whose voice matters, is one that the democracy team at the Post is dedicated to covering. And that is a subject that is massive, obviously, but it encompasses voting rights, it encompasses elections, it encompasses disinformation, it encompasses threats of political violence and the use of political violence as a tool to prevent people from exercising their vote. And these are all areas that are, 10 years ago, maybe you could have gotten by without a democracy team. Today, it is absolutely vital that you have reporters who are focused on these issues because they are very much at the heart of what we're seeing in our politics right now. And 10 years ago, maybe you can get away with covering the horse race of politics, who's up, who's down. Journalists right now at this moment cannot afford to do that. Journalism has to be very much focused on what is at stake. And as Jen says, very much putting into context what we're seeing now. I was picked for my job in significant part because I had actually never covered American politics before. I had been a foreign correspondent for a number of years, and I'd spent a lot of my time in working in countries that had authoritarian governments. And the idea that what I saw during my time as a reporter covering authoritarian regimes, the idea that could never happen in America, is obviously a fallacy. We think that it could never happen. We think that the United States is always going to be a representative democracy, and maybe it will, maybe it won't, but that is very much at issue today. And it's important to recognize those stakes, and it's important to report with clarity and with specificity, and also with a sense of proportion. And everything can't be a crisis all at once. You have to really focus on what the real threats are. But that is the job of the team at the Washington Post that covers democracy. And I'll say it also bleeds over into all of our coverage of politics now. It's focused very much on the reality of the situation that we're in as a country.
One question about that, and that is, are you where you want to? Are you the microphone? Okay. My question is, are you where you want to be yet in terms of the Post's reporting these stories the way you think they should be reported in terms of making sure that all the various angles that relate to authoritarianism are part of the coverage?
Every day we strive to get it right, and every day we strive to do better than we did the day before. This is a challenge unlike any that American journalists have faced, at least in modern times. And every day we're trying to figure out how to be best responsive to it. I think we have gotten a lot better than we had been at really contextualizing when there are actions taken or words spoken by political leaders that are threatening to democratic norms. I think we've gotten a lot better at calling those out in real time, identifying what they are, and giving readers the context they need to understand why that's important. So that means, really helping our readers to educate our readers and help them understand how democratic institutions work, why certain democratic norms are what they are, and also reaching out to experts, talking to people who are experts in authoritarian regimes, helping us to understand how a certain speech, how a certain pattern of behavior fits into what we see and can call the authoritarian playbook. So in those instances where you have leaders who are, whether consciously or not, replicating the behavior of authoritarians, we can point to that and identify that and explain that to our readers.
Great, great. Before we move on to Gary, if we wanted to go back in the Post website and find some good examples of what you're talking about, where would we look? What would we say?
So there is a dedicated page for the democracy coverage. I think it's WashingtonPost.com, maybe /democracy.
But what are some of the stories that really get at what you're talking about?
Sure. A few things. One is we did a pretty deep series last year called Imperfect Union that was all about the systemic issues that plague democracy and all of the ways in which our system actually creates when people vote, and even when the votes are counted fairly, even when people have the right to exercise their vote, people are not getting a government necessarily that is reflective of their desires, their views, their attitudes, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Gerrymandering, the way in which our system of government was set up to begin with, the way that the Senate systematically disadvantages the votes of people of color and prioritizes the votes of white voters, because in smaller states they get much more of a say in the Senate. There are far more white voters by and large than there are in much larger states that have much less of a say in the United States Senate. So that series is just one thing that I would point to. Imperfect Union, it is a 10-part series, and it looks in detail at all of the ways in which the system of government that we have isn't reflective of the popular will.
All right, thank you. All right, I want to also give a shout out to Professor Shipp there, who I see on the screen, who is with her students at Morgan State, some of the students at Morgan State. So we're happy to have students, and we hope that you get something out of this that you can take back into the classroom and in your daily lives, of course, as well. All right, where is Gary Fields? There you are, Gary.
I'm just
Excellent.
sitting here listening. Hi, everybody. First off, I want to say hi to everybody. I've known Ron since we were at Washington Times. Jackie was at USA Today. I don't think anybody worked with me at the Journal for the 20 years I was there, but I'm now at AP and on the democracy team. And different than Griff, I'm actually coming at this with the reporter's kind of view on some of the things that we're trying to do and trying to accomplish. One of the things I can tell you is just coming up with the definition of what is democracy, because democracy depends on what color you are, where you live, whether or not you have the representative government that we talk about. So you start by looking at what exactly is it that we have here before you can start looking at where do you think we're going. Now, we've got the democracy team. We set it up, I guess, early last year, early 2023. And some of the things we've been looking at are the same things that Griff was talking about, which is, you're looking at misinformation, disinformation, and what role that's going to play. You're looking at history and you're looking at what people say. Part of this thing is kind of easy because, hell, it's not like anybody's hiding what's going on here. People come out and openly say it and take open actions. You have open gerrymandering. Nobody's hiding the fact that they're trying to actually control seats and control Congress. Nobody hides the fact that there's disenfranchisement, or in a place like, for instance, Georgia, where they were changing some of the rules on what you can actually do in terms of going out to cast a ballot, that you couldn't have water, you couldn't have these various things. So it's not like anybody's actually doing this in a subtle way. So then it just becomes a matter of getting out there and getting off your behind and just going to cover the stories. One of the things that I think we all need to do, though, in journalism is to get out and try to figure out why these messages and why these things are resounding with the American population, or at least a sizable proportion of the American population, and get out of our own echo chambers. I can tell you right now, in 2016, they put me on the campaign trail. I came back to the Wall Street Journal, Washington, D.C. bureau in April or May of 2016 and said, Donald Trump's probably going to be the nominee. And everybody kind of laughed at me, but it was because I was actually traveling the country and seeing the signs and seeing the energy that he was generating amongst a certain population. We're doing the same things now. We try to get out and try to travel and try to sit down and actually talk to voters so we don't get surprised anymore by elections. And then, like I said, once you get to that, we have several people that are covering the impact of the elections and some of the steps that are being taken on the races, on denying people the ability to vote as easily as other people vote. Once again, you're definitely looking at disinformation and misinformation because we're all worried a little bit about what AI is going to do. I mean, that's a huge concern where I am now because we call races. So you know we have to be worried about whether or not anybody can figure out ways to get into our system and do AI on those kinds of things. Because once we lose the ability to call races, then a whole lot of things are going to be lost. I go around just trying to find the right places to go to and to try to be a kind of like a thoughtful kind of person. You know, one of the stories that I did that I enjoyed doing was how the word patriot has actually got these multiple meanings depending on what neighborhood you're in and who you're talking to, and what was it historically. Another one was talking about what are the guardrails to a presidency when we're talking about the Insurrection Act, because right now we're talking most of the time about the Insurrection Act and whether or not it was violated, and it's a 14th Amendment violation. But there's also not that many guardrails on a president being able to use the Insurrection Act to do things on American soil. So part of it is just getting out and covering the stories and listening to what people say when they say it, and not just assuming anymore that, oh, they're just talking. I like to think that everybody on this call, January 6th stopped everybody from thinking, oh, they're just talking and nothing can happen.
That's right. Okay, I'll ask you the same question about that I asked Griff, and that is, what are some of the AP stories, just a couple, that you would recommend that really explain what you're talking about?
Well, hold on here. I kind of thought that you might actually ask that. So let me give you here. I'm going to dump this in the, rather than me trying to explain it, I'm just going to dump it in the old chat here.
Okay.
Hold it. Let's come back up here. I figure out what the heck I'm doing. All right, I'm trying to actually get it to everybody in the chat, but I'm, here we go.
Okay, you got it.
Just gonna dump this behind Gilbert, but there's a link that I just dumped in there
Okay.
at 7:28. I mean, that's one story, which is the whole disinformation, misinformation story that we just did.
Okay, you have to explain it because some people on Facebook, for example, can't see what's in the chat. So,
Oh, all right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, what this story is about, it is about the use of social
Oh,
media, and the guardrails are fading, and where experts are really worried about what the impact's going to be on elections, because we're not really feeling like there are that many guardrails and that many things that kind of mandate how social media is supposed to actually be used. So kind of diving in there, because so much of what's happening right now is this misinformation, Bermuda Triangle, where everything kind of goes into it. Another story, and I'm going to dump this in, is this is one that I just did, and it's on what the service academies, because they keep hearing about this fear of the military being misused and abused. So I just literally went and sat in classes at West Point and talked to former cadets from Air Force Academy and checked in with some of the other schools to hear, what are you guys doing to prepare your future officers for the politicization that they are going to be facing when they get out. And it was really interesting. It was very thought-provoking to hear, because what they tell you is we'd be fools to say we're not political. What we can't be is partisan. You can engage in politics. You're still a U.S. citizen. And when you get out of the military, you're going to be a U.S. citizen. But you can't be partisan. And you have to be very cognizant of the fact that you can't do this while you're in uniform. That those kinds of things then reflect back on the military as a whole. So that's just, a couple of the quick ideas. I've got a whole ton of them that I could actually dump on you, but I'm not going to do that to you tonight.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. Okay, let's go to Barbara Arnwine, because the term voting
My Lord.
has come up in everybody's conversation,
Yes.
and that's what you're about these days. So, Barbara, for those who don't know, is the president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and she's working most recently on restoring the gutted parts of the Voting Rights Act. So tell us for your 3 minutes what we need to know and how this fits into the whole picture we're talking about.
Oh, does it ever fit in?
Okay.
I'm just sitting here and so much is resonating. Absolutely. And I just wanted to start off by saying, the Transformative Justice Coalition is a national, nonpartisan nonprofit that is centered in racial justice and centered in voting rights and our democracy, the fight for our democracy, for what I call an open, inclusive, and just multiracial democracy. A fight that I would say African Americans have been involved in, and many others for decades, centuries. They always like to say that if a tree falls in a forest and no one sees it, that it really has no impact. But what happens if the tree that falls is on fire and it has the potential to incinerate the entire forest? That's what we're looking at when we talk about the Eighth Circuit decision that came down, as we call it, a Thanksgiving surprise. It was, I think, purposefully released right before the Thanksgiving holiday on November the 20th, a case that had been filtering through the courts in the Eighth Circuit out of Arkansas regarding, of course, the issue of redistricting, where they had done what we call stacked, packed, and an actual cracked the African American vote. So it could have no power in congressional elections in Arkansas. And the case, if you talk to most people, they have no clue that this case is out there, because what the case did is at the district court level, the judge decided that he wasn't going to reach the merits of this cracking, packing, stacking, all of this, that instead, after 60 years of litigation, virtually under the Voting Rights Act, that he was going to find that there was no private right of action, that no private party, no matter how aggrieved, could bring a case in the federal courts seeking to vindicate their rights under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And neither could any organization or group. Now, as you all know, groups and organizations and private plaintiffs have been bringing these cases forever. These cases came out of individual action. Without John Lewis, Amelia Boynton, Timmy Lee Jackson's passing, C.T. Vivian being beaten up, the 600 people on the Pettus Bridge, for Bloody Sunday, there is no Voting Rights Act. It came out of the desire of individuals to have their rights vindicated. It was designed to do that. But this court decided that they would go back to what we call the wolf whistle from a case in 2021, the Brnovich case out of Arizona, and decided where basically Gorsuch and Thomas had said, well, probably there shouldn't be a private right of action under this law. And they just said it in dicta, toss away dicta, but it was really a call for people to bring these kind of cases. But interestingly, in the case below, neither party even briefed this issue. It was never an issue. The defendants didn't say, oh, they can't bring this case. They assumed, of course, you could bring the case. The plaintiffs never thought there was any reason to have to defend their right to bring the case because, of course, you could bring the case. In fact, remember that just last year in Evan versus Milligan, Allen versus Milligan, the big case before the Supreme Court involving Alabama's redistricting under the Voting Rights Act, there was no question, right, about any right to bring that case. It's a case that, quote, we won in the sense that the Supreme Court ordered the state of Alabama to stop their racial discrimination in redistricting and to create what is now called CD2, Congressional District 2, that has just been created. And it's amazing to think that the Supreme Court didn't raise this issue, but a lonely judge sitting in Arkansas decides that he knows better than anybody. And secondly, it's appealed by the plaintiffs. It's appealed to the Eighth Circuit, and they say he's right. It's a 3-judge panel. 2 say he's right. The Chief Justice of the entire Eighth Circuit says no way, and goes into the long history of the ability of people to bring these cases. And I just want to say, to me, the tragedy is that people don't know it. And here's where you come in. Most people have no clue because it was, in fact, the Thanksgiving surprise. And then, of course, what happens? The holidays come right after it. So people have no idea this has happened, but what's happened because of that case, and Daryl can go into it more, is that in the Eighth Circuit right now, 7 states in the United States do not have the rights that 43 other states have. I can go into Virginia and file a suit. I can go into Georgia and file a suit. But if I'm in any of those 7 states, Minnesota, South and North Dakota, Missouri, all these states that are covered by the Eighth Circuit, right now I can't bring a case. And in fact, my friends who are litigators are having their cases threatened with dismissal because of this case. And people don't understand that if this is the law of the land, we're dead. Our rights to democracy depends upon our enforcement. It depends on our vigilance. It depends on our advocacy. You take that away, and we have nothing. All the victories, everything that changed this country's outlook for democracy is dead if they win. And Daryl can talk more, but I'll just tell you there was an amicus brief that you got to look at that was filed in this case by 14 other states saying that this should be the law of the land, that this should be nationalized, and that this should be the law of the land. And just think about it, and I'll stop, who those states are. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, highest black population in the country, almost 40% black, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah. And when I talk to people from those states, they have no clue that their attorney generals and secretary of states were supporting this kind of a finding in this case. Deadly, evil, wicked. Thank you.
Well, how do you follow that, right? Briefly. That's an excellent way. Thank you, Richard. One of the things that is very surprising, and I listened to Jennifer when she was speaking very keenly, and she was talking about quashing dissent. And she was talking about politicizing institutions and the erosion of institutions. And one of the things that we see coming out of this Eighth Circuit case is precisely that. because this case really epitomizes what happens out of the state legislature there in Arkansas, where they've drawn these lines to be able to exclude African Americans from being able to have that voting power. That then is reinforced by the federal court. Now, the federal court, never before has the federal court said there's an issue of standing that's going to deny these people being denied their rights, their day in court. So what we see developing there is this erosion then of trust that's in the institution of the court system from those litigants, because they're being denied access, they're being suppressed. It is one of the most active actions of voter suppression that you can come around. What's left? We say, okay, if the private citizens can't bring the suit, Barbara Arnwine, okay, a voting rights attorney, cannot bring suit about a voting rights issue because she's a private citizen or because she's the head of an organization. Well, what does that leave? Well, what the court says that only the U.S. Attorney General can bring the action. Only the Attorney General, the Department of Justice. So you say, okay, that sounds somewhat reasonable. How many actions have they brought in the last 40 years? Of the 400 cases, less than 10%. Less than 10%. And it erodes even more, and I'm going to close on this, it erodes even more because you're assuming that the Attorney General you have in place is going to have an interest in pursuing those voting rights violations. If they don't, do what you want to. Have at it as long as you want, because I'm not interested in pursuing that because it's not in my political interest to do it. So that's why we have a resolution that we've drafted, because what we remember is that voting is as close to the ground, to the people as you can get. So we have a resolution that we're going to be passing around the country. It's going to county councils, to city governments, to municipalities. And what it's going to say is, we recognize the challenges that have been overcome by the use of the Voting Rights Act of '65. And we are in opposition to what the Eighth Circuit has stood for and what the 14 attorney generals around the country are asking that to be the rule of the law of the land. So our resolution is going to all of these, to many of the municipalities and local governments around the country, asking them to adopt it. If they don't adopt it, it puts the voters there on notice where their local government is standing on issues such as this on voting rights.
And what can be done about that? Lots. We have actually started what we call the Eighth Circuit convening, which is a nationwide conglomerations of organizations. And I'm so proud to say that the chair of our communications committee, Cynthia Robbins, is sitting right here as part of that effort. And the effort is multifaceted. It's very, very centered on a variety of strategies. One thing about TJC, Transformative Justice Coalition, we don't talk. We don't just talk about issues. We're activists. We're out there trying to make the fundamental transformative change that's needed in our society and getting citizens involved in it. So what we're doing is really working, and that's why we're here today, on making sure that the public becomes aware of this threat, because it's a real threat. This case, no matter what happens, right now people are trying to get the Eighth Circuit to hear it en banc, the whole panel to hear it. But even if they reversed the lower courts, the reality is this is heading to the Supreme Court. So this is the next big battle. What did you say? Oh, yeah, and other circuits have been trying to, pick this case up. They tried to argue this in the 11th Circuit, 5th Circuit, et cetera. I think that, when I mentioned redistricting, this case came out of redistricting, but let me be clear that one of the cases that's been affected by this is a case where there was a noose found in a polling site. If you walked into a polling site right now and they had a noose there, you could not bring a case against that county, against that Board of Elections, because if you're in the Eighth Circuit, you can't bring it. Anywhere else you could bring it. Remember when Georgia closed all those black polling sites? and but allowed all the white ones to continue to exist. We felt that, right? We used the Voting Rights Act. The food and water, good Lord. I was cracking up because Daryl will tell you that it was partially a response to ground action that TJC and Black Voters Matters were doing in Georgia, where we actually were having, food and coffee and hot tea, whatever we could give people to sustain them when they were trying to vote. And we got threatened by the Secretary of State for Georgia, who said, we're going to arrest you guys for this illegal activity of feeding people. And I said to all our folks, let them try it, because they have no basis in law to do that right now in Georgia. And of course, they passed this evil law so that they could have some basis in law to do it. But these are our realities. I mean, we're obviously aware of these pro-democracy forces and these anti-democracy forces in our society. But what we want really is to get people involved. So we are organizing, educating, activating all over the country around this. And you can imagine well, anyway, there's a lot that we've been doing, and I could let Cynthia and others talk about it.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, giving us some food for thought, and particularly people who cover states and state capitals should be paying attention. Yes, here. I want to stop to pause to thank our hosts. Ivan Myers here is from the Medill School, DC campus. And on the Zoom is the Dean of the school, Charles Whitaker. Charles, thank you very much.
You're welcome, and welcome everyone. Welcome to Medill.
And we have with us another guest who has given us the pleasure and the honor of having him here on his birthday. So this is a birthday gift from Gilbert Bailon, and we want to wish him happy birthday. He'll be speaking in a few minutes. But Gilbert, where are you?
Right here.
All right, let's sing "Happy Birthday" to Gilbert, and we can do that. We can do the Stevie Wonder version if you like. Birthday to ya, happy birthday, happy birthday to ya, happy birthday to ya, happy birthday. Okay, for those who don't know, Gilbert is in Chicago now. He is now executive editor of WBEZ in Chicago. And his station and the Chicago Sun-Times and the University of Chicago are part of the Democracy Solutions Project, which he'll talk about then. And some of us may know him from NAHJ or Unity or ASNE, the journalism organizations, or as editor and editorial page editor before that of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So thank you very much, Gilbert, for being with us. For our next segment, why don't we roll this? If you're ready, let's roll this. We want to take this to a different level. We couldn't get Eddie Glaude, the professor at Princeton, to be with us, but fortunately he was on MSNBC and we got a recording of that. He will talk a little bit about, it's very short, about why democracy is threatened, not by the politicians, but by the public. So let's roll this from Eddie.
Eddie, to go back to what we were talking about in terms of the abnormality of this moment, you are a black man in America, I'm a brown man in America. Did you ever think we would have a leading presidential candidate, one that right now is on course to win, according to a whole host of polls, echoing nakedly Nazi rhetoric about the poisoning of the blood of this country? And somehow people are just fine with it. We kind of shrug and move on.
You know, I never thought I would experience it in my lifetime, Eddie. But, you know, the interesting thing about it is that Donald Trump is not exceptional in a certain sense. He's actually reflective of a deep illiberal tradition in the United States that the tradition out of which I come is very much familiar with. And I think we need to understand that very clearly. And I also think we need to understand why this is attractive. I'm going to defer to Professor Ben-Ghiat on the strong men and the autocrats and the fascists. But I do want to say that this is a reflection of the collapse of an economic system where the neoliberal logic of Reaganism and Thatcherism, or however we want to describe it, that has left people out there trying to barely keeping their noses above water. And now they're reaching for languages of order as that economic system collapses and reveals itself to be bankrupt. And I'm not talking about, our 401ks doing okay. I'm talking about people struggling to put food on the table, keep their kids in college and the like. And so you have this kind of sense of instability that's leading people to reach for strong men to give them a sense of order. And when they do that, they look to the other. They look to the other, Mehdi, as the reason for why they're catching hell. And so I never thought I would see a Trump in my lifetime. But you know what? This is damn familiar to me, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you, Eddie. All right, now I wonder whether any of our remaining panelists want to comment on that or not, or we can move on to a different direction. But I wanted to put that out there so that if anybody wanted to say anything about that. In fact, what about Julie? Julie Milliken is Vice President of Media Matters for America, and she, of course, the whole function of Media Matters is to monitor the media and tell us what what biases they see, what we're doing wrong, not so much what we're doing right. But how do you react to what you've just heard, and also the work you've been doing?
We're not hearing you, Richard.
Yeah.
I guess this is on? Yes? Okay, great. For those of you who may not have heard, my name is Julie Milliken. I'm the Vice President of Media Matters for America. We are a progressive media watchdog organization that monitors and corrects conservative misinformation in the media. I promise I come in peace to all the journalists who are here. I say we do this because we actually have a deep and profound respect for journalism, its importance in the society, and how it does impact our democracy. And right now, journalism is under threat. I think that's pretty clear for anybody who's working in the industry. It's not just coming from the financial pressures of running a media organization, but it's also coming from threats of authoritarianism. And I thought this last clip was interesting because my media critic hat was on the whole time, and I'm sitting here like, this is really wonderful that I'm hearing about these democracy verticals that are being set up, the importance of this, the media recognizing that they need to start doing a better job contextualizing these threats to democracy that we maybe previously had kind of just taken for granted that this would never actually be played out in a serious way. But I thought that clip was interesting because it's the first time I've heard Donald Trump be mentioned in this conversation. And I think that speaks to a larger trend that we have seen in the media coverage of Trump in particular, but what's happening in the right, is that when you talk about, even when we get into the weeds about, hey, these threats are happening, it's not really often being identified by whom. Right? Like, it is not that this is equally happening on both sides of the political spectrum. The vast majority of these threats are coming from the right. The threats of political violence are coming from the right. Donald Trump is really open about his plans to use the government as a political weapon, to floating ideas about suspending the Constitution. And a lot of times that gets divorced from the political coverage when we're seeing this reporting. So one of the things that we did, and forgive me in advance, but it was kind of a warning shot coming out of 2023. We were looking at the coverage of the presidential race thus far, and we were seeing some warning signs about the legacy press. So when I talk about legacy press, I'm talking about the big major newspapers, the broadcast news, cable news, the people who are coming at it with good faith journalism, right? The people who we look at and trust and say, hey, they're supposed to be telling us, like, doing a good job. So I'm not talking about Fox News. I don't, I'm from Media Matters. Obviously, I do not have a high opinion about Fox. But what we were seeing time and time again, and we were doing lots of data studies throughout the year that we kind of were looking at a culmination of this and saying like, hey guys, there are some warning signs here that the press is falling into the same traps that they had been falling in previously that kind of led to 2016, that led to 2020. And we want to put out a warning sign for what's to come and say, hey, we're going to name the legacy media the misinformer of the year this year. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're seeing some bad trends. And, you know, just to name one, because I know we're, you know, short on time, but as far as this idea of contextualizing like the rise of authoritarianism on the right and how it's impacting our democracy and state of affairs, when Donald Trump announced his presidency, like candidacy again, when he said, hey, I'm running again, made it official, we looked at the media coverage of that announcement and found that the vast majority of the coverage did not mention January 6th. Just straight up didn't mention it at all. It immediately defaulted back into treating Trump like he was a normal presidential candidate. This was a normal announcement, that there wasn't this guy who's been lying about our elections for the last several years, who inspired an insurrection and, you know, has an entire political party and a political apparatus backing him up on this now. It was just absent from the coverage, and that was just the beginning of it. So we've seen sort of a pattern play out over time where this contextualization about what's actually happening and who's responsible for it is being lost in the coverage, and it's something that we firmly believe needs to be front and center. It needs to be out there in a way that people can understand how this actually will impact, like what the implications of what it is that they're saying is. Instead of just reporting, even if you do report, because a lot of times, you know, we all know how Trump is, for instance. It's just every word out of his mouth is another controversy, and you get really tired, you know? It's really hard to cover all of that. And just, so we see this coverage is just like running from like one like thing to another thing, to another thing, to another thing, without pulling back and just talking about the trend that's happening here, without pulling back and, you know, telling people what the implications of these policies are that he's talking about, and how that like is going to impact you, is going to impact communities of color, how it's going to impact immigrants, how it's going to impact our ability to vote for elections and just vote for the candidate that we want to have, despite all the restrictions on us. Like it's bad out there. And I think there have been signs that the media at large is starting to like come around to this and understand it. We have seen individual reporting that has been very good. It's the challenge, I think, has been that there hasn't been a consistency. Those stories will get reported one time, there'll be this great story and everybody shares it on their social media, and then that's it. You know, they're not referenced again in future reporting, even from the same outlets. They're not like referenced by other peers from other outlets. It's not, you're not constantly kind of tying this all back to like, here's what the threat is, here's how it's playing out, here's where all these alarm bells in the authoritarianism playbook are sounding. I mean, I think Jennifer has a really great resource for journalists. There's a lot of very specific, concrete examples of this playing out, and you know, these warning signs that they have playing out in other countries, but then also offering like, you know, here's some do's and don'ts, you know, as a journalist, when you're seeing this stuff, like how you should be covering it. And I think that we all could take a step back and kind of think about how it is that we can get ahead of what we know is coming. And also making sure that this unique moment that we're in is not just talked about like, here's this unprecedented time. Tell people over and over and over again how this connects to what it is this person is saying. I think that there's opportunity there. So I'm not all doom and gloom, but we're here. We'll be watching.
You say you've seen some good examples. Who's doing it right?
Well, I mean, honestly, I'll speak to even just something that's very recent. Over the weekend, I am sure everybody saw from the New York Times, Nick Confessori did a really, really great reporting around the origins of the current attacks that we're seeing around DEI and academic institutions, and how that came out of, the backlash from the Black Lives Matter movement, the, kind of pulling back the think tanks that were involved in, starting to fundraise around this, agitate towards it, how they lobbied local officials and whatnot to try to start to put these restrictions in place. I think that is in an isolation, that is a great piece of reporting. And I understand and I recognize that piece of reporting takes a lot of time to come together. But this attack is going to continue. So I think now the marker has been laid and you have to kind of look at the next coverage. Are we constantly contextualizing what is going on with this, what we know about it, what we know about the intentions of the people who are behind it? Those are the types of things that I think we could see more of, the connecting of the dots. I think that is just, there's an assumption that people connect these dots themselves and they don't, and so I think that's where there's a big opportunity for the media to really connect the dots about what's going on, because it's all related.
Very good, thank you. And I'll point out that the shirt I'm wearing, the T-shirt, comes from IRE and it's DEI. They've added a B to it for belonging. So, I just wanted people to know that which side I'm on.
You stepped out of the frame, Richard. So those of us on.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. I'll let you see it later. But since you've I made a cue here for you, Charles. We want to we want to hear from Dean Charles Whitaker of Medill, because we want to find out what's going on with the next generation, among other things, as well as his reaction to what he's heard so far. And then I want to hear from Louise Dubé, who's got a very interesting job. Sandra Day O'Connor, who just passed a couple of weeks ago, I guess, was very concerned about the fact that young people were not getting the civic education, the education in how government works and how they can influence policy that they should. And so she started this program, this institute called iCivics, and Louise Dubé is the CEO, and she will tell us a little bit about that and how that fits into the big picture too. But first, the Dean.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And again, thank you to my colleague, Ivan Myers, for his support there. He's working above and beyond the Call of Duty, folks. He doesn't get paid to be the IT person for these events. So thank you, Ivan, for supporting us. Yeah, that is a good segue, Richard, because one of the things that's struck me during the course of this conversation, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said about contextualizing the news, connecting the dots, as Julie said, helping people understand that democracy is under threat. All of that comes with a basic assumption, however, two assumptions, actually. One, that the general public has enough grounding in civics to understand what is actually taking place here. The reality is, despite the fact that, virtually every state in the union, students have to take at least 2 civics or constitution tests, the American public is woefully ignorant about democracy and how our government functions. And we in the media tend to operate on this level that presumes that they are all understanding of concepts like democracy, authoritarianism, demagoguery. But the reality is those are really, really abstract concepts to most of the American public. And the people who are absolutely familiar with and aware of those concepts, we kind of already have. The other issue that we have to confront, and we haven't really talked about here, is that no matter how well we attempt to connect those dots, and again, wonderful packages like Imperfect Union or that Griff talked about, or the AP coverage, the reality it also is more and more the American public is avoiding news. They are not seeing anything. It doesn't matter how well we do it. They are not buying what we're selling. They are not consuming it. They feel embattled. They don't like the rancor in politics, or they don't think that it has a direct effect on their lives. And so, Barbara and Daryl talked about how clueless people are about the Eighth Circuit case. Absolutely true. I wonder to what extent that is not just the fact that that information is not being presented to people, as much as it is also that people are completely tuning out on that information when it is presented to them. So it is incumbent upon us as journalists to find compelling ways to reach beyond the echo chambers that we always reach, or the individual. We're preaching to the choir all the time. You're talking about the New York Times piece over the summer, wonderfully done. But I will tell you, probably 90% of the people who read that piece were people who are already aware of those issues. How do we reach beyond the traditional audience that we are constantly preaching to and bring in those people who are tuning out, tuning off on politics, and engage them to ensure that they are well informed? And we find this happening on multiple levels. It is happening not just amongst the general public, even amongst college students. We find that a vast majority of them never read and or watch the news. So they are burrowing into their traditional, their news diet has a very well-worn pattern of TikTok videos and things that are not necessarily related to civics and the functioning of the democracy. We did a survey of Chicago area students aged 15 to 20 and found that over 70% of them said they do not watch any form or consume any form of news. That is terribly disturbing and disheartening, and really a threat to the democracy. So we as journalists have to confront that. We have to figure out how we're going to deliver this information to the vast swath of the public that, again, is not consuming it. And that's a deep and dire concern.
Here. Yes, he's good. Yes. But I wanted to, before you respond, let me hear from. Oh, sorry. Okay, before you respond, you got the other one, yeah. I want to hear from Louise Dubé. Is she on the screen?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. Well, please tell us about this project that was inspired by Sandra Day O'Connor and how it fits into what the dean just said about people not, even when they get to college, not really absorbing the news, not really caring.
Well,
What do you do about that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate that. So iCivics was founded in 2009 after Justice O'Connor stepped down from the court. And we are now today the largest civic education site in the country. We teach about 9 million students a year. That's about 50% of all civic students in America. And we most of all represent 320 other organizations in a coalition called Civics Now, CIVXNOW.org, which is run by iCivics. And those organizations are committed to making civic education a priority in our nation. I think I'm going to state it really plainly. I don't think that this democracy will survive without a radical investment in civic education. We could live without it for quite some time. When it functioned, the institutions and it was far from perfect. It had so many problems. At this point, though, we need to have a check and balance on the processes that you guys have all incredibly well described. And the schools of our country, K-12 schools, are one leverage point to do that. So as Dean Whitaker mentioned, students are not graduating with the proper training. And we have not only instructional materials, professional development, but we also have a 6-person policy team that is seeking to make change at the federal level to get a radically higher investment in civic education, as well as 40 states, coalitions in 40 states to try to pass legislation to get more civic and better civic education. What do I mean by better civic education? Well, what was interesting about tonight for me is I listened to all of you, and the role of an educator is very much the one that you described about how a journalist should do his or her work in the current context, which is to try to contextualize what is happening in our history, in our institutions, in our primary texts, and to get people thinking. So we at iCivics, along with 300 other people, created something called the Educating for American Democracy Roadmap and Framework in 2021. That was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education. That document is now being used in over 13 states to shape education. All it is a set of questions. What we are hoping and training educators to do is to take our civic infrastructure, civic institutions, civic primary sources, and shape them based on very hard questions that there is no one single answer to. What is Americans' plural yet shared story? What is reflective patriotism? How can you have concepts but yet concrete? Like those differences. So a lot of these design challenges that are baked in our nation. And our goal is to teach all students knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So the knowledge about, if you care about education, probably best to go to your state, not the federal system. If the skills, very important to have the skills to be able to disagree and with somebody else and to try to find a solution together. But mostly today, digital information skills. We have a digital democracy. Our education system has not caught up, and it's incredibly dangerous what is happening now. So we need to teach that as an utmost priority. And the third one, of course, is civic dispositions, so that students be engaged and not give up on the information landscape, right? So that you get involved in the process because there's no other way. So that's our mission. And we are making quite a bit of progress, actually. We've done a lot of polling, enormous support from Americans for civic education, at least at broad levels. But it is a real challenge, as you have all described, to be able to conceptualize complexity in simple terms for your average student, your average educator in the country. And it's important for us to be nonpartisan because that's where it matters. We have to teach in places where people are not paying attention. So that's a movement that's been gaining strength, but needs a lot of help. So I could tell you more, but for now.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, and Gilbert, we'll go back to you now to find out how the Democracy Solutions Project fits into all of this as well. You've heard what everybody else has said, and I know you were on the case there in Chicago, so tell us more.
Well, that's a really good segue because we're trying to accomplish educating and engaging people on a local basis. We've talked a lot about the national issues, which are significant. The effort is a combination of WBEZ, the Sun-Times, and University of Chicago. And we've started it 6 months ago. We're going to do it through the year. And the emphasis is to try to demystify, to inform people about political systems. Some of it's very practical about how to vote, where to vote, but it's also trying to explain how the system works. We know democracy is under fire, trying to explain on a local, regional basis how things work. We offer solutions for voters. So in this, we have multiple different things. Some of it's would be more traditional news coverage, features, guides, explainers, conversations, editorials, and stories that present solutions for people. We're also doing, we're going to do this spring, we're going to have 3 different trips to different international sites. One in Colombia, looking at immigration, one in Canada, looking at immigration also, and one in Australia, where we'll be looking at compulsory voting there, looking at how are these issues tackled elsewhere around the world. As you know, migrants have been bussed into Chicago. Immigration is a big issue. We're looking at how does it look like when you're in Colombia, where you're right next to Venezuela, and you have people coming in. Have they found solutions for that? It's also very engaging. We've done a survey already. We've had more than 1,500 answers from people about what do they want to know about, what are their concerns. We're with this at the University of Chicago. We're convening a group of what we're calling salons, where these are 15 people who we're going to follow through, asking them about their views and what what do they want to know to help shape our coverage? We have an email short course that kind of explains things. We have media literacy programs. And you mentioned earlier social media. That's a big part of it. We're going to try to reach people who are not traditional voters, traditional civics people, to try to get them through different means to pay attention to what's happening in democracy and to engage them. A couple stories that we've done that I think would be examples. We did, Dave McKinney, who's one of our political writers here, did a couple stories. I'll give you examples. Self-funded candidates, very much in the governors here in Illinois, whether it's Pritzker or Ron or others, are basically self-funded billionaires. What does that mean to democracy? We did another one on the corrosion of corruption, which, of course, if you know anything about Illinois, we have a record for that. What does that do to, and it's continuing. Our former House Speaker, Mike Madigan's about to be on trial later in the year. But what does that do to also erode participation in faith in government, not just people going to jail, but how does that corrode the system? So those are the kinds of stories that we've done that are helping to educate, but it's very engaging. We are going to do more stories. Also, University of Chicago is providing what we're calling primers that, from an academic standpoint, that explain things like voter apathy, term limits, redistricting, financing of campaigns, voter suppression. And we're putting them in the Sun-Times in print. We're putting them on our digital sites, and we're also doing audio. So we're trying to reach a very wide group of people and expand it. And it's more of a proactive approach as opposed to saying, we know these problems exist. Can we do something about it on a local basis here in a large market? That's the idea. We also have the Democratic National Convention coming here in August. So there's going to be a lot of attention from the nation later on. And not too far from that, from here in Milwaukee, will be in July, will be the Republican National Convention. So we see this as an opportunity that people will be locally engaged, but also engage them in national politics.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. All right, Barbara wanted to say something earlier.
Oh, okay.
Wanted to respond.
So much good stuff. I just wanted to say that we work a lot with young people. Our core work is done with people 18 to 35 years old. And, there's one glimmer of hope, right? There's many glimmer of hopes when you work with young people that just make you smile all the time. But I just want to point out that don't forget the surveys that have been done, the polling data. I'm not big on polling data because it's so inaccurate so often, and you can predict it's inaccurate. But in any event, but one of the ones that has been consistent is that in the last number of years, going all the way back to 2018, we're seeing young people voting for democracy. And they're saying that openly, that that's why they're voting. And it's not like 10%. It's not just 20%. It's, somewhere, in the 30+% range. And that's important because that's, where are they getting that from? Where are they learning to be concerned about that threat? Is it January 6th? Is it seeing the threat of authoritarianism? What is it? But they are hearing somewhere in all that social media milieu, all of everything that's coming at them, they're hearing the threat to democracy, and they're voting on it. And young women, of course, vote motivated by Dobbs. Of course, the Dobbs voters, are significant. So I want to say, we work with these young people, and Cynthia will tell you that when we put together the communications committee, all our young people flocked to the social media committee. Just flocked to it because they wanted to give their input. They wanted to be leaders in that space. Now, how do we work with young people? Really quickly, we put on 2 trainings a year, and we train, over 100 young folks every year deeply, like taking them into college, deeply into what democracy, the potential of a real democracy in America could look like, and how they do it, what they can do, how they organize. But anyway, I just think that don't downplay the beauty, the power, the hope that exists in the young folks.
Here, here. Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay, now time for our discussion and also our introductions, introducing ourselves to each other. Let's go to the Zoom first. Who has a question? Who is participating via Zoom? Oh, Julie wanted to ask. Okay. All right, go ahead, Julie.
I promise you I will be super quick. But one thing, I just wanted to go back to the idea of silos that were discussed earlier and like where people are getting their information and how young people are not consuming it in the more traditional means. One of the things that we do at Media Matters is we had started back in 2016 after online mis and disinformation obviously became hugely impactful in our discourse, started monitoring that, started also working with organizations and people who are trying to combat it. We're obviously trying to do that in one area, but there's a lot of different things that are going on right now where people are trying to meet young people where they are, and they're pushing back on some of the threads of misinformation that they're seeing within the spaces that they're getting the information. And while it may seem to reporters that nobody's reading my stuff, those people are. And then they're translating that into ways to talk to people who have been consuming that information. And so I still think that it is vitally important that traditional media in its traditional sense is still out there playing a role in pushing back on this. And again, going back to the contextualization, but also just fact checking and reporting what is out there. And people need that information to be able to counter this stuff. They need to be able to have something credible to look at to say, I need to understand this myself so I can understand how to communicate this to other people who aren't reading it. And so I just wanted to put in a little plug there that it's not all in a void. It may seem like it because they may not say, according to the Washington Post, blah, 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 but they read your piece and they use that to inform how they're pushing back or how they're talking about something or how they're trying to explain to a different audience what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any questions? Unmute myself. Any questions from the Zoom? I see Rebecca's got her hand up. Turn the computer off.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. First of all, I'm Rebecca Aguilar, the founder of Latinas in Journalism, the founder of the hashtag Calling All Journalists initiative, also part of SPJ and NHJ. First of all, Media Matters. Thank you for the work you do, because you're right. A lot of times I think that reporters have tunnel vision and they forget to add the information that is important to remind the viewer, the listener, the reader that this is going on. So thank you very much for your work. And thank you for this topic. Thank you for this conversation, Richard. Gary, I wanted to ask you, with everything that you guys are, Gilbert, with everything that you guys are doing in Chicago, is there one area where you're putting all your stories, all your efforts, like a website that everybody can go to? And for some of you other people who have paywalls, how are you making sure the viewer, the listener, the reader can go beyond the paywall, maybe can't afford it to read your newspaper, but they need to be educated, right? So I'm sorry for the double questions, but Gilbert, help me out on this.
Sure, it's wbez.org/democracy. We have no paywall at Chicago Public Media, so anybody could access that. It's a collections we've started that. So
thank you.
Karen Dunlap.
Yes, I'm to speak to a group of young journalists in the morning. They are newspaper reporters who've been in the industry probably less than 2 years.
Oh, Karen, could you identify yourself also, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen Brown Dunlap. I'm President Emerita of the Poynter Institute.
Okay, thank you.
Many of them see their newsrooms falling apart around them. They see themselves drowning in stories, and they're overworked. With so much going on, what should I say to them about these matters?
I could take that one. I could take that one just from I'm an old guy and been doing this a long time. Never have you been more important than now, because we're the eyes, and as journalists and the people that are out there, we're the eyes and the ears. We're standing at the edge of this history, and if we're not telling the story, who's going to tell it? Who's going to be left? back during the civil rights era, first off, there weren't huge numbers of, all these different sites you could go to where you could get alternative civil rights facts, for instance. So it is really, it's on us now to be telling the facts and to come to people and say, hey, look, you can read this, but I'm going to be here and I'm going to tell you this is what's going on. And I'm going to be doing it tomorrow, like I did it yesterday, like I did it the day before. Because if we're not doing this, if Washington Post isn't doing this, if you're not doing what you're doing in Chicago, who's going to do it? And if you leave everybody to their own designs, what happens to us then?
All right. Who else has a question? Or a comment?
Back here.
Oh, okay. Yvonne. Oh, you get a microphone.
Thank you. Is it on? Is it on? Yep. Hi, my name is Ivan Kroman, former executive director of NHJ and freelance journalist now. My nagging thing that's nagging my head right now when looking at the coverage right now of this campaign is, how do we as journalists fight against God and fight against people's thinking and feelings about God? I mean, if you look at the evangelists who are fighting, who are backing Trump, that comes from, a long history of the fight for prosperity, the Tea Party people, a whole network of people that then ended up who basically want to get rid of institutions. They want to make this a Christian country, get rid of institutions, and that's a way for them to do it, is they use the Voting Rights Act, they use all these things, and they use Trump, they recruited Trump, they used Trump to make sure that their vision of what this country should be, he would be used as their vessel to try to achieve it. So when you talk to these evangelicals, they're thinking about, oh, he's our guy, he's doing God's will. How do we counter that? How do you counter God? If they think that if they think that that is who so they're equating authoritarianism with God's will, and all these others and all the elites and everybody else are the devil and Satan. So we're on the good side, they're on the bad side. How do, as journalists, do we contextualize that to then, I guess, have a discussion with the public about it?
So I think that's a really interesting question because Media Matters, that's something that we've also noticed is the rise of Christian nationalism and the influence of Christian nationalist media in this current moment. I think, I don't know that, I'm skeptical that you're going to be able to change anybody's opinions, but I think a role that journalism can play in that is actually getting everybody else who has no idea that this, it's, I don't know how the best way to put it, but it's almost like there is an entire alternate reality that's happening, and they have their own media systems, and they have their own broadcasts, and all of these politicians are going there and talking to these people, and it's happening in a vacuum that most of us are completely unaware of, and we don't know what their goals are, and we don't know what the intentions are, we don't know what they're talking about with these people, and I think there are ways to tie that back to what's happening in the current moment. And again, it goes back to this, I feel like a broken record about contextualizing what's happening in the moment, and that is a big story about what's going on that I think has kind of flown under the radar. And so I don't think you necessarily are going to get an evangelist who believes this stuff to say, oh no, Trump isn't our savior. That's their beliefs, but I think for other people, you need to talk about what's going on there and what the implications are for that, and how that relates to freedom of religion in this country, how that relates to some of the fundamental principles that this country was founded on, how they're trying to rewrite history so that they're saying that this was a nation that was founded on Christian principles of God, and therefore we're trying to get back to what the roots of the Constitution is. They're trying to turn it all on its head, and absent anybody calling this out and explaining what's going on, that wins. And so I think that's a role that the journalist can play here, is this is a story, this is something that's happening, this is something that we should be paying attention to and talking about what the implications of that are.
Yeah, I was just concerned that As a big function. There's millions of people and they vote. Those people will vote. Their pastors tell them to vote. So
We have to get it on here. The people online can't hear. So
All right.
The back and forth doesn't work because the people online can't hear.
All right, Duran Snyder, and then we get to Julie.
Yeah, hi, this is Darren
Darren
Snyder.
I'm sorry.
I'm a columnist with the Grio, GRIO.com. And Michael Harriot had a very interesting piece the other day. And it got me to thinking, I never really thought about this, but the headline on the piece is, the Grio's kind of provocative. So the headline is "The Lazy, Stupid Analysis of the Quote, Unquote, Black Vote, which obscures the most important political issue of our time." I never thought about it, but we do hear a lot about the black vote, and is Trump gaining more black voters and this and that? The black people got to show up. And just one graph in here, I just want to give you a taste. This is Michael Harriot. Historically, the majority of white people in America always vote for the opposite of what black people want. Poor whites will vote for a party that opposes raising the minimum wage, taxing the rich, and providing health care, because in white identity politics, policy does not matter. White women will support politicians who want to control their reproductive rights, because whiteness matters more. Suburban moms want good schools and safe neighborhoods, but vote for candidates who oppose police reform and accurate history. This is the white vote. And he says he struggles to think of an issue where we focus so intentionally on something that's really small, the percentage of the voters that are black. He says it's like if ESPN only talked about special teams during football coverage. Or if first grade English teachers refuse to discuss vowels. What if the Weather Channel only covered places where the sun is shining? Even when someone dares approach the issue of the white vote, it must be euphemized as soccer moms or NASCAR dads, as if we don't know who the, quote, rural voters are wearing, quote, blue collars in, quote, red districts are referring to. So I would just say, as an industry, we should check ourselves on how much attention, because this is something that people say to me, oh, black people are going to Trump or whatever. 99% of, maybe 90, that's not an issue. The issue is the roughly half of our white brothers and sisters who are, maybe some of them are evangelicals or whatever, but they're the ones who seem to be like, we're down with this authoritarian move. So let's just keep that in mind.
Okay. All right. On the Zoom, John Yearwood and then Eliana Bailey.
Richard, John Yearwood, I'm editorial director at Politico. As always, really fascinating and very interesting conversation. I have a question for my former colleague Gilbert. Your Democracy Solutions project is really interesting. I've looked at some of it online. I thought you said earlier that you also are looking at and reporting from Colombia, Canada, and Australia. I was struck by that because I wondered whether you had given any thought to also reporting from Africa, because there are some fascinating stories there that could tie into immigration in Chicago and elsewhere. And if that's something that you will be looking at.
Well, that would be, John, that would be a good exploration as well. What we're trying to tie it back, and because since immigration is such a big part here, yes. I mean, I think we're looking at it because a lot of it is focusing here as a local story. Obviously, immigration is a national story, but yes, if we can tie it back, we looked at those examples because we saw those as also the reporters pitched it because they have some familiarity on the ground there. But yeah, we could certainly look at expanding it beyond that. That's a good point. These issues transcend geography, and that's what we're trying to bring home to people. The different ways that governments are trying to cope with it, and how people are trying to cope with it in different places. So yes, Africa could be a component. Yes.
Eliana Bailey.
Hi, Hi, I'm Elena Bailey. I am a
Elena
media
Bailey, sorry.
student. No, it's fine. You're good. It's okay. I'm a second year media student, and I've noticed within just my immediate community in Texas, in North Texas, that like a lot of our speakers have said, that people in my generation are not consuming news. I don't necessarily think it's because they're actively trying to, but I definitely see how algorithms and AI can position media in a certain space and it just not come on their feed. Especially if they're looking to social media or the internet in general as an escape from maybe studies or whatever's going on at home. So I was wondering if anybody had a suggestion on how we would be able to kind of gather that information enough so that people can be exposed to, especially young people can be more exposed to what they can do civically.
Okay. Yeah.
So a few thoughts. One is just that we at the Washington Post want to be where readers are and where people are, because maybe they're not reading, maybe they're watching, or maybe they're listening, and so that means that you can find all of our news on our website, but you can also find us on podcasts. You can also find us on TikTok, where we have over 1 million followers for the Washington Post account. But wherever you go and encounter Washington Post journalism, we want it to be quality, and we want it to make sure that it meets a certain standard. And so, our TikTok account is dealing with things in a very different way than the story on our front page may deal with it, but it's still the same substance, the same. It may be dealt with in a humorous way, or it may be dealt with dancing or singing, but you're learning something. You're being exposed to actual reporting, actual information. The second point that I would make is really off of something that Barbara, that you mentioned earlier, which is really engaging with young people in a way that reminds people that there actually are ways that they can engage in their democracy that are helpful and that are productive. And there are so many things going on right now that are negative, that are a crisis, and we could fill the paper 10 times over every single day with negative news, and we have a lot of it every single day. But also it is important to remember that there are things that are happening that are positive, and that people, when they engage, actually are capable of moving the system and changing things. And so that Imperfect Union project that I mentioned earlier, a lot of it was focused on the problems with our democracy, but we really made a point of profiling people who had engaged with their democracy and who had improved the system and who had changed things. And that included young people. So, we wrote about a young woman in Michigan who was very disturbed by the gerrymandering that she saw in Congress, in her state legislature. She got on Facebook and she said, "Who wants to help me end gerrymandering?" And, she didn't expect anyone to answer, because who was she? She was just a young person who had no formal role in politics whatsoever, no experience in politics. But it just so happened that 1,000 people answered and said, "Me, I want to do it."
Wow.
And the first thing she did after that was Google, "How do I end gerrymandering?" And she was able, from that, just sort of throwing an idea out there, to start a movement that actually did change how congressional districts and legislative districts are drawn in Michigan. And it took it out of the hands of politicians who are always going to draw districts to favor themselves, and it put it in the hands of citizens. And so, it is important. It's not Pollyannish to focus on the positive when it does exist. It's important. It's a reminder that there's nothing that is predetermined about the direction that our democracy is headed in, that there are ways that regular citizens can engage and can change things.
Okay, thank you. I see Philip Martin. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I got to tell you, this has been a phenomenal panel.
Tell us who you are, Philip.
Oh, thank you. I'm a senior investigative reporter for GBH in Boston. I've been working on issues of democracy and anti-authoritarianism for a while now. preceding actually January 6th. And a statement I wanted to make, but seeking comment from our panelists, is this. I think two of the most important terms used during this discussion is the term contextualizing, and the second term is interconnectedness. And the reason those terms are important for all of you, our panelists in this discussion, is that what I've been covering quite a bit are grassroots white nationalist groups, authoritarian. Some are explicitly neo-Nazi. Some call themselves white chauvinists or Western chauvinists. The Proud Boys fit that description. Neo-Nazis come in the form of groups like NSC 131. I've been following them for a while. I was the first to report on them here in New England. And I'm raising this because what you're seeing is these people regard themselves as sort of ground troops for a larger movement. Some of them are explicitly connected to MAGA. Some of them endorse MAGA views. But they see Donald Trump as a savior, if you will, or at least an opening for their form of far-right politics. And I think that should be contextualized when we're talking about the erosion of democracy, because you're seeing a grassroots movement that seems to be covered quite often separately from their political supporters, with the exception of January 6th. We see January 6th people referred to as hostages. Many of these January 6th people are explicit white supremacists. That's what January 6th was about. Some are MAGA supporters that don't necessarily believe in white supremacy, but believe in some type of supremacy. And I'm concerned that we don't always connect the dots, as someone was saying earlier, of these grassroots or groups that like to see themselves as grassroots. Some of them are AstroTurf, like Moms for Liberty, is involved in a singular connectiveness with the Proud Boys, for example. You see this in Tampa and St. Petersburg. You see it in New Hampshire. And I'm wondering if our panel would comment on the trends we're seeing with book banning, with groups like the Proud Boys, NSC 131, more explicit neo-Nazi groups, and some, again, that like the Patriot Front, that try to oppose, that were formerly Vanguard America, that try to pose as strong supporters of Western civilization, but posit themselves as not being, at least outside of the conversation, not being racist. And I was wondering if you would comment on that context and the role, again, of these groups who see themselves as ground troops for this movement. And you could also, if you will, connect Project 2025. That's also part of this discussion. Thank you. It's a lot.
Who wanted to answer that?
Apparently I'm answering that. So I kicked off my comments by mentioning the 7 tactics in the authoritarian playbook. One of those tactics is targeting historically marginalized groups as a political tool. And many of the things in that, or many of the sort of examples in that list would certainly fall under that. One way that we might put this into context, for example, is if you look at groups that some scholars would term as militias, for example. And I think this is a valuable example because it shows how there doesn't need to be sort of a grand puppet master orchestrating these things for there to be real impact. If you look at the history of militia groups in the United States over the last 40 years or so, what tends to happen in the earlier part of that period is that militia groups would form, there would be a moment, there would be a Ruby Ridge, whatever it might be, and then they would sort of fade away and dissipate and go away over time. What scholars who have been studying these groups over the last 10 to 15 years have noticed is that recession of groups has not necessarily happened. and that they are not isolated from one another, that they're finding these opportunity structures to stick around, to collaborate, to communicate, to work together in ways that we haven't necessarily seen. And that would be just one example of the way that we can see the different pieces fitting together, right, to create a whole that is more than the sum of its parts in some ways. And those are the patterns that I think are very, very concerning, and the type of context that could be brought to readers, to viewers, to help understand the moment that we're in, so that while the numbers of adherents to these groups are numerically fairly small, right, I don't want to create a boogeyman here, that concern is very serious because of that context and because of the way that it fits within this ecosystem.
Oh, well, Cynthia wanted to say something too.
Please.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Robbins. I'm a lawyer by training. I am actually now doing some work with the Transformative Justice Coalition on its response to the Eighth Circuit issue that was raised, and I'm also a very concerned citizen. I would say that one of the things that's of greatest concern to me is that I find that for the most part, the mainstream media does not use the term white supremacy, rarely uses the term racism, and that is part of the lack of contextualization for what is happening to our democracy, because it's really at the core. And one of the things that I think the right has been so extraordinarily effective at doing is appropriating the terminology of democracy, of civil rights, of Christianity. I am a Christian. Evangelicals and the evangelical movement is anything but Christian in my view. And a lot of the things that they're standing for are very disconnected from Christian doctrine. But it's all going under that banner. And so then you find yourself trying to fight God, but they're really not doing anything that is godly. And so but it's a very hard battle to fight, because who's going to fight God? And so I think we have a very big challenge in the media to somehow, with a populace that is not civics educated for the most part, to begin to share this nuanced element so that they begin to see. And I think what you were saying is that we really do need to point out how the reason why I think the militias are not disappearing is because there is a resource to keep them connected. And one of the main resources is the MAGA movement and Trump's campaign and the Trump campaign folk. It creates a galvanizing point, and I think that's why we're seeing so many people coming out to vote who really are otherwise not following what's going on. I have to say that one of the things that I was very excited to hear about the WEBZ program and the iCivics, because and transformative justice work with the young people. That is our hope. We have to get people to actually know and understand civics. And this training program that they have, I am the person who's doing the communications project. I've been working with a number of these young people who are very strategic at getting polling places on campuses, at really galvanizing one another and producing very effective graphics that educate their peers. So I think I'm excited to hear about the person in Michigan who said, let's fight gerrymandering. So I think there's a reason to be hopeful. But I do think that there's a challenge, and I'd like to hear how mainstream media people are really dealing with this. I love the Griot piece. I think, it really was calling a spade, and it doesn't happen very frequently.
Okay, we're running low on time now, so let's. I'd like to hear from the people who haven't said anything yet. and also they can introduce themselves. So let's start with the people on the Zoom. Let's see who has it. Roger Witherspoon. Introduce yourself, please, and say if you have a question or a comment, you can add that.
Well, thanks for the invitation, and as usual for having a great discussion. I've been a journalist since the mid '60s, and all forms of the media, including times when I was on a Klan kill list. And I appreciate what you all are doing.
Okay, thank you. Mark Fitzgerald. Oh, unmute, please. You got to unmute.
I'm Mark Fitzgerald. I'm a former editor and publisher where I spent a lot of time. But I'd like to address Karen Dunlap's question precisely. She had a really good question, and that was, how do you get hope to journalists who are, young journalists who feel that they're overworked and overburdened and in a declining industry? Two things I'd say. First, there is hope, because if they're a young person who went into journalism, that shows a basis of hope that is pretty astounding. The second thing is, I would like to look back to my experience, not at editor and publisher, but when I was with a paper called the Passaic Herald News in Passaic, New Jersey. It's now a shadow of itself, and it wasn't much. It was not a shadow of itself. And one of the things that I did, of course, I was like any other beat reporter. They gave me 3 towns to cover. They said, you got to get 3 stories out of each one of these towns every single day. And I realized the first day I was there aren't 3 stories in a year in any of these towns. But you dig and you do, and you get it, But on the other hand, what I also did then was propose other articles, like magazine type style articles. We started a whole thing on that. When there's confusion like this, when there's chaos like this is when a good reporter can just go in and sort of infiltrate yourself, really. I mean, Mao said, there's much confusion in heaven, all is well. There's much confusion in the media right now. And for a young, ambitious person, I think not all is well, but a lot is well. And they can, I hope that they're listening to, and I hope that Karen will bring in the sort of things that came up today. Somebody can take all of the ideas that came out here today. A young person in their early 20s, the world is their oyster.
All right, thank you, Mark. Joanne Lyons-Wooten.
Good evening. As always, Richard, you did another one. This is great. I actually put this in the chat, and I want to follow up with what Philip has raised, because Project 2025, I find to be just bone chilling. We talk about grassroots organizations, but this is very high level. I mean, to have the Heritage Foundation and all of these Trump, folks who were formerly in Trump's administration, with this brain trust, I mean, they have a plan and they are executing. And I find it just bone chilling, and I'm disappointed that there are so few news stories about it.
Here. Okay. All right. How do I stop this? I got you. Okay. All right. Rhonda Bellamy Hodge.
Well, hello, and I apologize for not being live on video, but Monday is my admin day, which means I don't do much as far as my looks are concerned. I've got so much to do. But
first identify yourself also, please.
Yes, I'm getting ready to get to that. Okay. I am the director of social justice programming for the Denton Black Film Festival, and I must thank Beatrice for letting me know about this. I think she put me, as well as Bailey, in touch with Richard. So we're just so happy to be here. And I just wanted to make a couple comments, in particularly about not losing hope and not losing our faith. In particularly, toward young people. When I was a graduate student here at SMU, I was bowled over about the enthusiasm of young people. And when I say young people, I'm talking about people that are from, 18 to actually about 45 or so, because once you start to highlight how issues affect their lives, I think they start to listen and they start to come up with plans, like you said about the gerrymandering. And one issue that I saw on SMU's campus was this young lady who decided, why should she have to pay tax on period products? So she designed a program to help stop having those products taxed. Even though we still have the tax here in Texas, but it's top of mind on a lot of organizations and businesses' mind now. So oftentimes, ladies, when you go into certain places now, you'll see free supplies, because even though the state of Texas decided they didn't want to stop the tax on it, businesses and other organizations said, we can fight it another way. We'll make them free for anyone who needs them. And when you think about the course of a woman's lifetime, think about what free menstrual products could mean. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can put into other aspects of your lives. So young people can see a need in their lives and go and try to find solutions to the problem. And I think our job as their elders are to help them focus their energy, to focus their attention. Because remember when they were telling us when we were younger how older people didn't want anyone to touch their Social Security. Well, from the looks of the screen now, many of us are either getting Social Security or close to it. So, and we feel like that's pretty set in our lives now. But there's a particular candidate right now that is suggesting that people should work basically until they're almost dead before they get their Social Security. She's suggesting it's moved up to, 69, 70 years old before you can get that. So I think when you make it,
Rhonda.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ida Jones. Ida, are you there? Okay, Beatrice McBride. Are people hearing me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, this is
Okay.
Beatrice McBride. I really appreciate this conversation. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Beatrice McBride, the Director of Photography for the Denton Black Film Festival. And I really appreciate this conversation. As Ron mentioned, we have a film festival coming up starting on Wednesday. We have a lot of great films coming up. And a special shout out to TJC. They've done a great job with educating our young people. What I really appreciate what they've done is they've gone into the grassroots communities with visibility so that folks who don't normally even hear these conversations or even know about them have a better understanding why their vote matters. And kudos to Barbara and her team.
All right, thank you. Nichelle Smith. Nichelle Smith.
Hello there. Can you hear me? See me?
We can hear you but not see you.
Oh, there I am. Hi, hello everybody. Nichelle Smith. I'm an investigative journalist, formerly with USA Today. And as Dean Whitaker spoke, I found myself going yes, because you basically answered all the questions that I was going to have. We talk about democracy, and we have democracy editors and democracy and big announcements about, look, we're looking into democracy, and democracy is important. And the average person, I think, because democracy, like love, like hate, are broad abstract concepts, people are left scratching their heads like, what do you mean, voting rights? Oh, that's a Black thing, isn't it? Or, civil rights. So we almost have two things to do, particularly as Black journalists, keep the connection of democracy as a civil rights issue top of mind, while at the same time disconnecting it enough to allow the average white person, and that's really the issue here. We haven't said that much today, but the issue is getting the average white person to understand that the threat to democracy is just as much a threat to his way of life as it is to the ways of life of Black and immigrant people. Too often voting rights is I think is dismissed. Even our younger Black and brown people fall into the trap of, voting rights. We hear ads all the time. There are always pushes for voting rights, and people believe that this is just something that people of color need to worry about. But what democracy editors and reporters and those of us interested in that sort of investigative work need to do is really clearly spell out to people, here's what democracy is, and here's why it matters to you that the Voting Rights Act may be written out of existence very soon if nobody watches out. So thank you. It's been a very interesting session, Richard.
Thank you, Michelle. Deborah Berry.
I'm here now too, if I get a chance. Richard, Ida Jones, but I'll mute and be called on again.
Okay, well, let's hear from Deborah, then back to Ida. Deborah, you there? Okay, Ida. No Ida either? Yeah, I was just here a minute ago. Okay.
Yes, good evening. My name is Ida Jones. I'm at Morgan State University in the library. I trained as a journalist at Howard, and I actually know E.R. Shipp. So I have the pleasure of working with her. And I'm very excited about this conversation. I'm learning about the 8th District Court in particular, because I think we don't connect the legal precedent here. And we have this dichotomy of a black-white thing, when it's really kind of a green money and no green community. So we really need to kind of broaden our spectrum outside of just simply the dichotomy of race. And we look at the idea of the haves and the have-nots, because that gap is widening. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, we'd have more of us on the 99% unified against the 1% that's trying to put us underfoot. So thank you, journalists, for once again being the tip of the spear and bringing this to our attention. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ida. Sharon Farmer is here. She's also on Zoom, so. Sharon, introduce yourself, please.
All right. Kill the mic. Boom, mute. Oh, I'm going to have a hit record yet. Look at here. The fun of everything is that at last we're getting to the truth about what goes on everywhere as they begin to undo even the idea of civil rights. And all of us know we don't want to be the people alive when they start getting crazy, okay? The kids have no clue because nobody's telling them, nobody's training them. It's not about TV and videos and TikTok. It's about your life and your education. If you don't get educated, you can't make a money, you can't make a survival. You're not going to be here very long. And every time I run across one more person on the street, DC looks like any other ghetto in America right now. I don't care what park you're in, from Franklin to Rock Creek Park. There are some serious things going on that are not being handled by our elected officials. Thank you.
All right. Sharon is our photographer. Okay, I don't see any more on Zoom. There must be. I thought they were there, but I don't see them. All right, we'll go into the room here. Let's start in the back with. Oh, you have a question?
I'm here, Richard. Sorry, I had a hard time signing in.
Oh, Deborah. Okay. All right, Deborah, please introduce yourself and if you have an observation to make.
Sure. I'm Deborah.
Briefly.
Sure. I can do brief. I'm Deborah Berry. I'm a national correspondent with USA Today. I'm actually on our new elections enterprise team. So this fits in well with what we're working on. But I just had a quick question and observation too, is that I've been doing this for a long time, writing about these issues for a long time. And I have to acknowledge that sometimes it's really frustrating because, of course, this is a business and it's all about clicks. And sometimes, despite the story, despite the anecdotals, despite the examples, sometimes it's a hard sell to sell these stories because they don't always get clicks. So with that said, I know y'all are offered all these great ideas, but if there's some kind of reality check of how we can make this a clickable item, which it may never be, that would help because it is a hard sell sometimes.
Put Taylor Swift in there.
I didn't hear you.
I said mention Taylor Swift and let's see what happens.
That story did get clicks. Honestly, somebody did it yesterday. It got clicks.
I would say as a young person, a lot of us, we go to movies like Barbie or even Oppenheimer. If you take a look at how many numbers that film made, it's an intellectual film about the political state of war. And I'll be honest, a lot of young people went to see that movie because yes, there was, you know, it was laced with facts and Hollywood and stuff like that. But I think as young people, we really like watching vlogs or a story. So we like seeing the day in the life. I feel like if media, traditional media, kind of peeled back the layers a little bit on how they communicate what's going on in our local communities, young people would be like, okay, I know this person a little bit more. To speak to Richard's joke about Taylor Swift, which is crazy. I mean, it's insane how many times they panned her during a football game. But she shares her story. So I feel like that's why she has such a big following, is because people feel like they're growing with her. And I feel like if young people need to grow and learn about civics, then that could be a way that they could tap into what you're talking about, Deborah. Sorry.
That's good. That's good. Okay, thanks. Is Donna Owens there? I see a name. Donna, are you there? Okay. All right. We'll go into the. I think we got.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah.
Just trying to get the online people.
Okay. Donna. We heard somebody say hi. All right. Moving right along. Let's go to the. All right. Go ahead, Gabby.
I have a question about what do you, I'm sorry, Gabrielle Gurley, the American Prospect. What do you do with the, what I call the "it can't happen here" syndrome? And I'll piggyback off of what Sharon said about things could get really bad. I'll piggyback off of the Project 2025 comment that was made earlier. And for me, it hits home when I hear her talk about deportations. I saw a tweet from Stephen Miller the other day, January 14th. The deportations will begin at 12 p.m. on Inauguration Day. And it also brought it home to me again this weekend in the New York Times in Germany. Apparently, an enterprising journalist who was not named got a recording of a far-right group talking about their intent to deport immigrants, which for the Germans is representative of the Wannsee Conference from the Second World War, which was basically the planning for the final solution. So, but when you mention this amongst your journalism friends or your editors or in the story idea meeting, it's always, that's not going to happen here. So how do you respond to that?
We'll continue with the introductions, and along the way, somebody will answer that question. Let's go back to Lynn.
My name's Lynn Adrian. I'm on the Journalism's Advisory Committee. I'm retired from running the graduate broadcast and digital journalism program in Washington for the Newhouse School at Syracuse. I've been to Wannsee. I know what you're talking about, and I don't have the answer. But it deserves to be talked about because you're right. People blow it off sometimes because they don't want to think about it.
I'm Betty Ann Williams. I'm also on the organizing committee. I formerly worked for USA Today and the Associated Press and several other media outlets, plus the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies.
Ivan Roman, former executive director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I'm a freelance journalist now, and I worked as a journalist in Miami, in Rochester, New York, and in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Oh, and I'm on the organizing committee.
Hi. I'm Elizabeth Sjogren. I'm a professor here at Medill. I work with graduate students, these wonderful, bright spots of hope that we've been talking about. So nice. And I formerly was a journalist at the Los Angeles Times and NPR and a couple of other places.
I'm Rebecca Sturtevant. I'm a communications person at Media Matters, so really here just to support Julie.
And you're doing a great job.
I'm going to just have a quick answer to your question about how to get people to take it seriously. I honestly, I wish I could. I have the same question all the time because with the Trump people in particular, they're very open about what they want to do. and they have a history of acting on it. This isn't like, I don't know. It almost feels intentional at this point for editors or reporters or anybody to stick their heads in the sand and say, "Oh, this they don't mean it. This isn't going to happen." They absolutely do mean it. They absolutely are putting the plans in place to make it happen. They tried to make some of this happen previously, and they figured out where they got obstructed and how to get around it. So they're learning, and why we aren't learning with them about like needing to just very clearly state what it is that's going on and show that this is not idle threats. I think it's crucially important that journalists or editors or whoever's blocking these stories grow a spine and just acknowledge that this is going on. So sorry for my little soapbox. I will pass the mic along. Bye, everyone.
Hi, I'm Andrew Pham. I'm a graduate student here in Northwestern Medill. I'm a student of Elizabeth, and we have another project to cover the primary of Republican, and that is something new to me because I'm from Taiwan, so it's the whole new system for me. And even though I got some knowledge about before 2020, it might not be that useful now. So things change a lot. So it's nice to learn more about how these even what their rhetoric might really hurting minority. And yeah, thank you.
Any final thoughts from our panelists? Yeah, Jackie. Yes. You're in the wrong. Yes, go ahead. Right.
I'll get me later. Here.
Oh,
Darren, you have a chance.
I'm Darren Snyder, Right for the Grill, longtime USA Today journalist. We're having a reunion Wednesday at the National Press Club. USA Today alumni reunion.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for telling me. That's why I pointed at it. That's why you pointed at me. I'm Jessica Lee. I'm a recovering journalist, a longtime reporter for USA Today and Gannett newspapers, and happy to be here.
I'm with Bob Arnwine. I'm her driver. At least I started out being her driver, but now it's whatever need to be done.
Good evening. And wrapping up, it's a great program. Thank you all for listening and people hanging in online. I know it was long this time. I'm Jackie Green. As Richard said, I'm one of the co-producers of the program. We just want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for hanging in there online with us there. And we hope to have you in our next program.
All right. Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts from these panelists?
Well, take us in order, right?
However you want to go.
I first just want to say how much I enjoyed this conversation personally. This was fascinating, and thank you to everyone who was so active and sort of thinking through these hard issues. I would also try to end on a note of optimism. As a former university professor myself, I see a lot of hope in young people as well, and I think that there's a lot there. I think there's also a lot of hope in civil society right now. There's a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of really smart people who have resources ready to help. And just look for those is the last piece of advice that I would offer. And just thank you to everyone.
Yeah, I've been taking notes throughout. So many great ideas offered here today and so many great observations. And I really appreciate everyone who has joined us online, joined us in person for this great conversation. I would just say as a closing thought, having lived in countries where there are autocratic or authoritarian regimes, what those regimes crave most of all is apathy. They want people to disengage. They want people to stop caring, to stop paying attention, to say, politics is messy, it's ugly, it's someone else's job, I don't want a thing to do with it. And that is music to the ears of any would-be autocrat or authoritarian, because the moment where people disengage is the moment where they can amp up their power and make sure that there's no resistance to what they're trying to do. And so I know these are difficult times. I know these are times where we are all exhausted. We all just want, I feel this too, where I want to say, I don't want to pay attention today. I don't want to hear what's going on. And we all have to fight against that, because that is a temptation that does lead down the road to democracy falling apart. And I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure the people who are producing the news, the people who are consuming the news, to stay engaged, to pay attention, and to hold people accountable for their actions.
What are some of the countries that you lived in?
Yeah, I've lived in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Jerusalem, London, Berlin. I spent a lot of time in Egypt during the Tahrir uprising. Spent a lot of time in Hungary and Poland while they were in their most recent phase of autocratic rule. So.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having us. Seriously, this is beautiful space to be in. Just wanted to, when I teach law students, and I do, and the first place I start is with, a map that I do that goes a circle of American democracy, and from, what I call voter denial to voter denial, and just walking people through this whole history and this whole connection between this fight over these 400 years. But one thing I always teach is that racism and fascism are interdependent twins. You don't find racism rampant without fascism. You don't find fascism rampant without racism of some sort. And it's very important, I always do that. And I think that, this whole conversation, there's one thing we haven't talked about, and we got to talk about consistently. I'm on my way to to Charleston, to Charleston, South Carolina in a couple of days. And this will be the 9th anniversary we're coming up on of Mother Emanuel. And the white replacement theory is huge. Folks, it's just huge. And it's driven by nothing. It's driven by demographic fear, demographic change. It's just huge. I mean, remember, that was Dylan Roth's whole thing was white demographic, fear. It was the white replacement theory. We've seen it in Buffalo. We see it everywhere. And I just don't want us to forget that's, driving so much of this love of strongmen, authoritarianism, all this. But I just wanted to end on 2 requests, 2 hopes. People want to know what's really happening. When we tell people what's going on with the 8th Circuit, folks get upset. They get angry. They want to see what can they do about it. They don't want to go backwards. They somehow in their mind, they got that racial memory or whatever that tells them that this is horrid, this is dangerous, and they never want to go there again. And that's important. And women have that same thing when we talk about Dobbs. And I just think that that's one thing I want us to remember, that your job is amazing because people want to hear from you. They're desperate. They're sad. People just hunger for content every day, and they don't get the content they need. It's just too much noise. They're looking for good information, solid, profound information that affects their lives. The second thing I just want to say is the forest fire is not without an antidote. We have to really keep focusing on the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Congress has been negligent. Nobody calls them to task for it. It should never be a partisan issue. How in the world did this happen? But we have to keep focused on that. I don't care whose party, if they're not focusing on the Freedom to Vote Act, which would stop the gerrymandering, which would stop people waiting 3 hours in line. By the way, those are my heroes. The people who wait 3 hours in line, can you imagine, to vote? standing out there and all that. I mean, we watched them in rain and howling rain and storms. I mean, come on, those are my heroes. And they make me as happy and hopeful as the young people do. And don't forget Alexander's coming out any day. Any day. The Supreme Court will be issuing the Alexander case any day now. Which is the South Carolina redistricting case, where they're saying basically it wasn't race. We didn't draw all these racially gerrymandered districts because of race. We did it because of partisanship. Partisanship. And that we should be able to get away with it. Remember, well, anyway, I mean, Mike Johnson just raised this issue in Louisiana when they were doing the vote on the second congressional district for Louisiana for African Americans. And he said, you guys shouldn't even do this vote because you're going to make us lose another Republican seat. And so he was going all partisan, but they were afraid that if the legislators were afraid if the judge drew the map, that Scalise and some others would lose their districts and wouldn't be safe anymore. So that's why that legislature got out there and did what they needed to do and passed that, other districts. So there's a lot, at stake. But don't forget, Alexander's coming out. And Alexander could take Milligan and just destroy it. It could do a lot of things. It was an ugly oral argument. Please get ready for it.
Okay. Darrell, do you want to say specific?
Sure, just very, very quick, very quick. I always underscore what Barbara has said because the Alexander case is really major because what we know is that, the Supreme Court has already said that if it's partisan reasons for the gerrymandering, that it's fine. And so what South Carolina now has done is said, we drew these horrible districts where we cracked and broke up all the black districts so that they lost all their power. But we did that for a partisan reason, not for a racial reason. The difference being that if it's partisan, it can't be reviewed by the federal court. If it's racial, it can be reviewed by the federal court. So that's the thoughts that's there. Very quickly, we heard a lot of hits on our young folk. And I'm always, and Barbara already knows what I'm going to say before I say it. I'm the one that always stands up for our young folks. And I remind people, and journalists, everybody else, when I'm on the radio, Confederate statutes came down because of young people. Gun laws were enacted because of young people. Police reform was close because of young people. Environmental protection back in that, young people pushing that. And to bring it really home, let's not even talk about the student loan debt reform. Young people did that. Young voters were out there doing that. And the state of Georgia, y'all better be thanking young people for the 2 U.S. senators that they have. So I just want to leave on that note that young voters are out there, young voters are pushing it, and young voters need to be certain that they hear about their victories. Otherwise, they're going to be, more inclined to not get involved. They need to appreciate the victories that they've received, and we need to recognize them.
Amen. We love them.
All right. I see that our host, Dean Whitaker, is still with us, which is great. Did you have, Charles, any closing thoughts that we should leave on?
No, it's late.
We can't hear you. Unmute.
I am unmuted.
Okay.
No, it is late. I thank you for coming out and safe travels.
Okay, and thank you for hosting us. Appreciate it. All right. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Okay, the chat box will be printed out and distributed to all those who are here and for whom we have email addresses, and all those who are on the Zoom for whom we have emails. And stay tuned. We'll talk about February in short order, and hopefully we can see some of you there too. All right, thanks for and have a good evening. Oh, there's more food. There's more food for those who are in the room that you can take with you. Turn off the Zoom just a second.